Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first of our three live presentations about the Tour du Mont Blanc 2025. My name is Marvin, and I'm the founder and general manager of Alpine Cols, which is a group of cycling coaches based in the Alps, specialized in sportives and ground fondos. The first presentation is about guidelines for your personal training plan, and we especially focus on the first part of your training, meaning the period from now until April. It will last about 40 minutes or so. The remaining two presentations are on the 27th of March, when I'll present part two of the training plan, and finally on the 3rd of July, when I'll present how to get your best result on the day. This is now the fifth year we're presenting a training plan for the Tour du Mont Blanc, so it's reasonable to ask, well, what's new? In 2021 and 22, we presented the entire plan in one single session. In 23, there was a major upgrade to split the session into two parts, which enabled a deep dive on the event demands and on how and why it's important to build a strong aerobic base. Last year, 24, we did a deep dive into metabolism, fat burning capacity, and nutrition strategy. And this year, we will include an enhanced focus on recovery and especially adaptation. Because without recovery, you don't get any adaptation, which means your training is ineffective. At best, you're maintaining, but you're not getting stronger. But I encourage you to find the 2023 and 24 videos on our channel on YouTube and watch the two deep dive sections, because I won't go into so much depth this evening on these topics. Here's the agenda then for the evening. First of all, I'll present a set of guiding principles for an effective training plan tailored for the Tour du Mont Blanc. I'll show you a framework training plan that you can adapt for yourself. And we will then look in detail at the preparation phase, which is the part between now and the end of March. Then, and this is new for this year, I'll go into some depth about how to get fitter and stronger through better recovery and stress management. And last but not least, we'll touch on some off-the-bike training. So here's a quick reminder of the route, the parcours, which is often referred to as the toughest one-day sportive in the world. I'm not going to analyze it today, just to highlight that it covers 330 kilometers and includes 8,300 meters of climbing, spread out over 5 major climbs and a bunch of shorter ones, adding up to a total of about 154 kilometers of climbing. So these are huge numbers, and you mustn't take this event lightly. I can't emphasize too much how tough this event is, and therefore the importance of preparing properly for it. So it's a good thing you're listening to this. And you're obviously committed to that. The start is before dawn at 5 a.m. in the morning, and unlike the guy in the photo, many will finish after nightfall, perhaps having to do the descent from the Cormier de Roselane in the dark, as well as, of course, the final climb in the dark. The cutoff time to finish is midnight, so all official finishers, by definition, take somewhere between 12 and 19 hours. In a good year, only about 60% manage to finish. So don't ask me what happens if the weather's bad. It's above all an endurance challenge. And although all participants are timed, there's no official classification, and all finishers receive a medal and a gold certificate. It's really a challenge on 3 levels: mental, physical, and nutritional, and in that order, in my view. The most likely reason to abandon is mental. For most first-timers, it'll be the toughest thing you've ever done by some margin. At the halfway point, you'll have ridden almost the equivalent of the Marmot, which has the reputation for being a super tough sportive, but it's still only halfway. So to reach the finish, you'll probably have to push yourself to your limits and then go beyond what you thought were your limits. You can expect to experience highs and lows, with moments of euphoria where you can't believe how strong you feel, followed by moments of despair when you can't believe how bad you feel. And many people think of quitting more than once. Now, the key is preparation, of course. If you've prepared properly, you should be able to find the tenacity and determination you need to keep going. So if this doesn't scare you a little bit, it probably should. So before going any further, let me take a minute to tell you how we can help. We have a series of training camps in 2025, all with active coaching, any of which would help you get a better result at the Tour du Mont Blanc. The point is, no matter what level you have, you need to spend as much time as possible cycling in the mountains. That's okay for those of you who are lucky enough to live in the Alps, but if you don't, you need to plan at least one and better two trips to the mountains between now and the end of June. So here are the camps we're running in 2025. First one's at the end of January in the Canary Islands, where we can expect to ride in summer kit and warm sunshine while everybody else in the Northern Hemisphere is freezing. The second one is a 7-day itinerary camp in the mountains of Corsica in April. Third one is around Mont Ventoux in May. And the fourth one will be in the Alps in early June and will include a full reconnaissance of the Étape du Tour. For details, please go to our website or send me an email, info@alpinecols.com. End of the little page de pub, as they say in French, the little commercial break. So now let's talk about what it takes to do well at the Tour du Mont Blanc. I went into this in a lot of detail in 2023, so you can get the full analysis in our 2023 video on YouTube. Today's a quick reminder. The most important physiological demands are aerobic capacity and fat burning capacity. The most important psychological demands are the ability to stay motivated and positive. The most important technical demands are climbing and descending skills. And finally, the most important tactical demand is the ability to pace yourself. Your training plan should help you develop all of these. Now, coming on then to your personal training plan, it's important to understand there's no such thing as a standard training plan for the Tour du Mont Blanc that will work for everybody. The best training plan for you is one that's been designed with your unique situation in mind. And on top of that, it's constantly adapted for you as and when things change. For all these reasons, we're not providing a detailed day-by-day training plan. What we are providing is a framework and a set of guidelines for you to adapt to your own unique circumstances. And the goal is to give you the means to think carefully about the process and to take responsibility for your own preparation. So be aware that some of what I say may not be appropriate for you because I don't know your individual situation. So with that said, let's take a look at the guiding principles. The first and most important principle, if you want to do well at the Tour du Mont Blanc, is that you need to make it a priority. Not only in your training, but also, at least to some extent, in your life. And if this needs negotiation with your partner or your family, now is the time to do it. Next, you must be consistent in your training. It's no use training really hard for 2 weeks and then doing nothing for the next 2 weeks, or on a weekly basis, only training on weekends. You should be doing some sort of training on at least 4 or better 5 days per week. Point 3, the single most important quality you need to develop is your aerobic base. Remember, this is number 1 on the event demands. Unfortunately, there are no shortcuts to this. You need to spend a lot of time on your bike, mostly at low intensity. Because if you spend a lot of time on your bike at high intensity, pretty soon you'll be overtrained, you'll be too fatigued to continue. And you'll be overtrained and you'll be in a real mess. So that's why it needs to be at low intensity, a lot of time at low intensity. This will create the endurance adaptations you need without adding unnecessary fatigue. So just go into that in a bit more detail. Why ride at low intensity? Because surely if you want to ride faster, which everybody does, you should train faster. No? Well, no, it's not so simple. The key point is that you will get all the aerobic adaptations you need, which means the metabolic adaptations, the extra capillarization, and all of that good stuff at low intensity. And making every ride as hard as you can is a very ineffective way to train for the Tour du Mont Blanc or any long endurance event like this for at least 2 reasons. 1, if you do that, you're training your body to rely on carbohydrate for fuel, which limits your ability to do long rides. And 2, you're limiting your ability to build your aerobic base because of all the extra fatigue. So it'll work when you first start cycling, but you'll soon hit a plateau. This chart shows the percent of time spent training at different intensities, with 1 being very easy and 7 being close to all out. The red and blue bars represent 2 contrasting training approaches that we see all the time. Most beginners, and indeed many club cyclists, train something like the blue bars on this chart, with most of their time spent riding moderately hard in zones 3 and 4, which is basically as hard as they can manage for 2 or 3 hours. It's now been shown that it's more effective to do the vast majority of your training at high volume and low intensity, combined with a small amount at high intensity, as shown by the red bars. So this is called polarized training, and it's particularly effective for ultra type events like the TMB. And for the Tour du Mont Blanc, I recommend 90-10, not 80-20. So it's really massively skewed towards low intensity with just a little bit of the higher intensity. And we'll see in a minute. I'm not talking about very high intensity. I'm talking about moderate intensity, in fact. Now, to do polarized training right, you need to be clear on the zones. There's a very simple three-zone model, which is all you need for the Tour du Mont Blanc. The most important zone boundary is between zone 1 and zone 2, the moderate and the heavy zones. This is called LT1, the first lactate threshold, and it's the point at which the lactate concentration in your blood begins to increase as you do more work and use more oxygen. Just be aware that in a 5 or 7 zone model, the moderate zone is split into 2, so LT1 takes place on that type of distribution between zone 2 and zone 3. Now, you should do the majority of your training at or below this point, LT1. So how can you determine it? Well, the best way, of course, is to do a lactate test, which you have to do in a lab unless you buy your own lactate test meter, which is quite a high, steep learning curve to understand how to use it. So you go to the lab and they measure the lactate concentration in your blood while you increase the load step by step. This is, however, expensive and not always easy to find. So an easy alternative, which actually works surprisingly well, is just to monitor your breathing and especially whether or not you can talk comfortably with your riding buddy. If you can't carry out a totally normal conversation with no effort, you're riding too hard. It's as simple as that. Now, this will probably take place at a much lower intensity than you think, or or certainly that you hope. And for most people, it's actually no more than 60 or 70%, or 60, or even 65% of their heart rate, of their maximum heart rate, or your FTP. And it may be lower still. Don't be surprised if it's lower still. Now, back to our list of guiding principles. So the fourth principle now is to develop your fat burning or fat oxidation capacity. So this is a metabolic improvement. I explained this in detail last year, so you can go to that 2024 video to learn more. But very briefly, the more you can burn fat, the less you need to burn carbohydrate. And this is a huge advantage because we only have limited stores of carbohydrate in the body, and when riding hard, we deplete them faster than we can replace them. Our fat stores, on the other hand, are effectively unlimited, even in very skinny people. So let me underline that for the Tour du Mont Blanc, which is above all really a metabolic challenge. So if you're going to finish within 19 hours, you're going to spend approximately 15 hours climbing. If we do the calculations for a 70 kilogram cyclist with 10 kilograms of bike and equipment, he or she is going to expend about 11,000 calories in energy on top of the 2,000 or so required to stay alive. But the maximum amount you can reasonably consume on the bike in 19 hours is around 6,000 calories. That means consuming over 300 calories an hour, which means a large bottle of energy drink, for example, a large bottle of energy drink and 2 or 3 energy bars or the equivalent, hour after hour for 19 hours. And believe me, that's not easy. That requires a lot of practice. Yes, it is possible to go even higher, but then it's even more challenging. So remember, you only have about 2,000 calories stored in your muscle glycogen. So this means when you add it up, there's a deficit of at least 3,000 calories. If you can't get this from fat, you're going to find it really, really hard to continue. And basically, you can't continue. And that's when you see people bonking and lying by the side of the road, completely unable to continue. And believe me, this happens at the Tour du Mont Blanc every year. It's even worse for those who push too hard from the start because they burn through their glycogen early. So, about halfway through, there's suddenly nothing left. So in the importance of fat burning. Now, the fifth principle then is to increase the load progressively, the training load. If you're currently only training 8 hours a week, which wouldn't be unusual for this time of year, and your longest ride is 3 hours, but you want to increase this to 12 hours per week and your longest ride at 6 hours, which is roughly what I'd recommend, you should take probably a good month to get there because your body needs the time to adapt. Unless you've been doing that for years, you're going to have to get there fairly progressively. Sixth point, do as much climbing as possible. By the time you get to June, you should be doing at least one ride, totaling 4 or better still, 5,000 meters of climbing during that one ride. Keep the intensity low, obviously. The harder you climb, the less total climbing you'll be able to do. So the less effective your training is going to be. Remember, again, the Tour du Mont Blanc is an endurance event. It's not a race. And you'll have to ride it at a lower intensity than you would ride a more typical Grand Fondo or Sportive like the Marmot or the Étape du Tour or any of the others. If you live in a flat area, your options are: 1, to do hill repeats on whatever you can find nearby; 2, to travel to find some climbs at the weekend or obviously during a week that you can take off; or 3, to do the climbs indoors on a smart trainer. And particularly in winter, that's probably quite a good solution. 7, never lose sight of the fact that your body only gets stronger when you rest and recover. Training breaks you down and it creates the stimulus needed to get stronger, but you only actually get stronger during recovery. It's really important to allow your body the time it needs to adapt and get stronger. And finally, number 8, you should include some exercises in your training to develop your technical skills, such as descending, cornering, eating on the bike, your ability to take off your jacket and put it back on while riding, all of that good stuff, because that can save you an awful lot of time for no extra energy expended. So now we've talked about the general principles. Let's take a look at the training plan framework. It includes 3 phases or periods. A preparation phase where you prepare your body for an increased training load and develop your aerobic and fat burning capacities. Pre-competition, where you add still more volume and get yourself ready for the actual event. And finally, the competition or taper period where you reduce the volume of training and therefore the fatigue without losing any fitness. So here you can see our framework training plan, which you can download from the Tour du Mont Blanc website. Just be aware that at the moment I'm speaking, it's the 2024 framework, which is still up there. I will put the 2025 framework up there as soon as I can, but it's going to take me another couple of days. The difference will be fairly small in the actual framework. It's a framework and not a detailed day-by-day training plan for the reasons I've already explained. The idea is that if you understand the reasoning and the rationale, you can design your own training plan that's perfectly tailored for you. So I'm not going to go through the plan in detail, just let me highlight the structure. The first page that we're looking at there tells you what to focus on during each period and why. And then there's a second page with suggested workouts for each period and a typical week. Each phase is broken down into 4-week cycles, including 3 load weeks and 1 recovery week, with a target training load for each week. If you're over 50, there's some evidence that adopting a 3-week cycle of 2 load weeks and 1 recovery week might be beneficial, because from 50 onwards, it takes us more time to recover. So, that's something you can feel for yourself. The second page then provides you with a typical training week and a typical recovery week, so high volume week, low volume week, and suggested workouts during each period. Now, so how do you take that framework and customize it for you? It's best to be pragmatic and start with your constraints, especially training time availability per week. Be realistic here. Confirming it with your partner and family might save an awful lot of misunderstandings and arguments throughout the year. So which days of the week can you train and for how long? What are the family or work commitments that will prevent you from training on certain days or weeks? So as much as possible, think that through, block it off week by week, the training time that you'll have available. So as an example on the screen there, you're going to end up with something that is quite a long way from ideal because we all do, unless we're retired and have got nothing else to do but train. But that can't be helped. So adjust things as much as you can to respect the principles of increasing the training load, followed by recovery in 3 or 4 week cycles. Now let's look at what should be in part one of your training plan. So this is the preparation phase, which runs from now until the end of March. The key objectives or the focus during this period are, of course, one, to build your ability to train for 10 to 15 hours or more per week and to ride long distances without undue fatigue. So two, it's really part of the first objective is to build your fat burning capacity so you'll get these metabolic adaptations you want. And while doing these long endurance rides, try to include some exercises to work on technical skills such as descending and cornering at speed. So these first three objectives cover 90% of your training. The remaining 10% is to build strength and strength endurance, which is sometimes called durability. So those are the objectives and the focus. Now let's look at how to do it. So here's our recommendation for a typical loading week in the preparation phase. The rides are in order of priority. There's no shortcut to developing your aerobic endurance. You need to ride as much as possible. So progress to 5 and then 6 or 7 hour rides at low intensity. So do one of those per week. Don't fall into the temptation of riding faster. Remember, these rides are supposed to feel slow. So the target is hours in the saddle at low intensity, not distance. If you set yourself a target of distance, you'll be tempted, just subconsciously, you're just going to ride faster to finish sooner. So the important thing is time in the saddle, not distance. Again, at least 90% of your training should be like this, which is why the second ride is also a long, low intensity ride, a bit shorter than the first. If the weather forces you to do these indoors on a turbo, you can reduce the time by 20 or 30% to account for the lack of freewheeling or micro brakes. Obviously 6 hours on a turbo is hard. It's mentally hard. It doesn't mean you've got to ride without stopping on the turbo for 6 hours. First of all, time on a turbo is worth more than time on the road, so you can reduce it by 20 odd percent. But also, of course, on the road, you're going to be going up and down as well. So there's no reason why you shouldn't stop for 5 minutes or so after every hour, which might simulate a descent, if you will. So you don't have to stay on the turbo and pedal for 4 hours solid, for example. Okay, just that makes it a little bit more bearable. Now then, the third session in terms of priority, is now an interval session, typically of 1 to 1.5 hours. Only 10% of your training time should be like this. Okay, so let's take a look at what that could be. We could discuss forever on what are the best interval sessions, but the point of doing intervals for the Tour du Mont Blanc is to increase your durability, or your ability to maintain power when you're fatigued. You don't want to be reduced to a crawl on the last 2 climbs. This means it's better to do long sub-threshold intervals or even tempo intervals rather than short ones at VO2 max or above, because that's not a quality that you really need on the Tour du Mont Blanc. Those higher intensity stuff. It's nothing like training for a short criterion. The ones I'm showing you here are 15 or 20-minute blocks with 5 minutes easy. So these will definitely work, but there's nothing particularly magic about the time duration. And if you have a climb near you which takes 17 minutes, for example, that's perfect. Choose the intensity so that you can complete the session. If you haven't done any intervals for a while, I suggest starting in zone 3 at tempo pace. And then over a 4 to 6 week period, you can work up to higher intensities. So is it better to do these on your turbo or on the road? My preference would always be to do them on the road, so long as the weather is bearable and the road is safe enough. Okay, so during the winter months, it may make more sense to do them indoors. Once the weather improves, the ideal time to do these long intervals is towards the end of a long, low-intensity ride. For example, you might ride for 4 hours at low intensity and then do 2 or 3 by 20-minute intervals in zone 3. Why do I suggest that? It's because your challenge on the Tour du Mont Blanc is going to be getting up the last 2 or 3 climbs. And that's where you need the durability. You need to be able to maintain the force or the intensity over a very, very long day. So that's why it's worth training at low intensity for 3, 4 hours and then doing your intervals at tempo or even a little higher. Okay, that will train that quality of durability or strength endurance, you hear it called sometimes as well. Now, the other question is at what cadence? My suggestion is to vary the cadence between sessions, but probably not during the session at this time of year. So do alternate sessions at high cadence and low cadence. What does this mean? It depends on you, but high would be above 80 RPM and low would be below 60 RPM. Be aware that at any given power, it will probably feel harder at high cadence and your heart rate will certainly be higher. Be careful at low cadence, especially below about 55 RPM, because if your body is not well prepared for it, if it's not something you do often, the extra strain could easily injure your lower back or your knees. So it's a good thing to build up towards, but again, build up to it very, very progressively. And if you feel the slightest pain, then back off from it. Either back off the intensity or increase the cadence. A few things to remember. Warm up very well before the first interval. That's obviously not an issue if you're doing these at the end of a long ride, but if you're doing it on the home trainer in the evening one week, warm up for at least 15 minutes and really 20 to 30 minutes is better. Remember that these intervals are as much about your mental ability to tolerate the effort and the pain if it gets that far as the physical side, so they are supposed to feel hard. However, it's not a good idea, at least during this phase, to completely empty the tank. It's better to stop with 1 or 2 intervals in reserve. All right, now your 4th session during the high load week should be a third, or yet another, if you will, low intensity ride. You might not be able to the timing now is probably 2 hours, but it's still a low intensity ride. If you're really feeling good and decide to do a 5th training ride and you've got the time to do that, then keep it to a maximum of 1 hour and at very low intensity. Now, this is a typical load week. It doesn't apply, of course, to a dedicated training week in the mountains, where you may be able to do 5 to 6 hour rides for 5 or 6 days in a row. So that would add up potentially to 30 hours or so, possibly even more during the week. But this is unsustainable week by week, especially if you have a full-time job, obviously. So you can. The point is, you can do it for a week, but then you're going to have to spend a week of recovery. Now, a brief word about nutrition strategy, and then we'll look at stress management and recovery. There are 3 important objectives concerning nutrition. Above all, it's to fuel your training load adequately so that you're eating exactly what you need, but no more, because you don't want to be taking on weight. 2 is to optimize your ability to burn fat. Remember, this is essential in order to fuel the long rides at the Tour du Mont Blanc. So there are ways to adjust your nutrition to help optimize that. And the 3rd objective might be to achieve your desired weight if you're a little bit overweight at the moment, or more rarely, if you're underweight, you need to add muscle. Now, achieving these 3 objectives together means you need to adjust your total calories consumed to be equivalent or slightly below the calories you're burning, while adjusting the relative amount of carbs and fats you eat to correspond to your training load. The basic idea is to train your body to use fat for its base load and low intensity training, and only use carbs when you need them at high intensity. Now, it's not as simple as that. This is quite complicated. I went into this at length in last year's presentation, so I suggest reviewing that on YouTube if you're not completely familiar with these concepts. Now, let's come to recovery and adaptation. And the point of training is obviously to obtain an adaptation. If not, at best, all you're going to be doing is maintaining your current level. Unfortunately, training load doesn't automatically result in adaptation. In fact, for the same training, the adaptation you get depends on what happens when you're not training, which may sound strange, but I'm going to explain why. There are plenty of studies which show this. In one study, for example, carried out by Alan Couzens, who's a US-based coach, triathlon coach, elite swimmers with higher life stress had a higher incidence of injury or illness and a significantly lower performance improvement over the season compared to the group with lower life stress. Furthermore, the swimmers who had the top 15% of life stress ratings showed no improvement in performance for the season. And that's despite putting in exactly the same training as the low stress group. And in fact, some of them actually got worse. So can you imagine that? They trained for the whole season and they had no improvement whatsoever. And the main reason explaining that was they're under high stress. There are plenty more studies that show that recovery and adaptation is inhibited by stress, and that's training stress or life stress or both. So all this stress forces your body to secrete various hormones that are needed to manage the stress, but which also, unfortunately, have the side effect of inhibiting your training recovery. So what this means is when you're highly stressed, you should only train at low intensity just to maintain your fitness. Don't do anything high intensity or even high volume, and don't expect any real improvement until your stress comes back to normal. So what do we mean by stress? So we've said adaptation is inhibited by stress. The thing is, to your central nervous system, all stress is the same. It doesn't matter if it's an acute stressor, like hard training, of course, like traveling, crossing lots of time zones, like an illness, if you catch the flu or a heavy cold, an evening of heavy drinking, or a major argument with your partner, or a major problem at work, which happened that day. All of those are acute stressors. Or you can look at chronic stressors like overtraining, like a more chronic disease, if you've got long COVID, or if you've got a flu which hangs on for days and days and days. If you've got long-term challenges and stress at work, if you've got financial worries, if you've got relationship difficulties, and all of that stuff is stress over a long period, the result is the same. Your nervous system doesn't care. In order to be able to deal with that stress, your nervous system is going to be in a constant state of fight or flight, which is the sympathetic state of your central nervous system. Whereas what you want in order to be able to recover from hard training stress is to be in a parasympathetic state, which is the so-called rest and repair state, the opposite of fight or flight. Okay, so fortunately, there's an easy way to measure your current level of total stress so that you can keep an eye on it. I mean, obviously, we've all got some idea of how much stress we're under, but some of it is hidden and we may not be very well aware of it. So you don't need to test for the hormones in your body, but just for their effect on your central nervous system, and especially on your heart rate, which we can see through your heart rate, and especially your heart rate variability. What I recommend you do is install the HRV4 training app on your telephone, on your mobile phone, and then measure your HRV every morning just after waking up. Don't rely on an overnight reading from, you may have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or a Whoop band or an Oura Ring or any of these other things. For reasons which are too complicated to go into here, those readings are useless for the purpose of measuring your readiness to train hard. The only thing that's really effective then is something like the HRV4 training app, which you use to measure your heart rate variability under strict conditions. So do it as soon as you wake up, seated, and for 1 minute. Okay, that gives something that's under the same conditions every day. It's repeatable, and you've had your full night to recover. Okay, so it gives you the best data. Now, when you start doing that, initially for the first few days, you're just getting data. Then after a week, the app will report your normal range. And so long as your HRV is normal, all is good. You can train as per your plan. So looking at the example there, you can see on there my heart rate variability readings during a period of 7 or 8 days. You can see that all was good. So the white line is the 7-day moving average, and the gray area is the normal range. So in this case, all was good until the 20th of May, the one from last reading, when the reading was well below the normal range. So all I did was, I was obviously heavily stressed that day, or rather the previous day. So overnight, I hadn't recovered. So on that day, I took a day off from training, and the next day I'd recovered. So that's the way to use it. If it stayed low for a second day, I would have continued either to not train at all or else just to train very, very light until it recovered. For more on this, you can check out our video on our YouTube channel on the use of heart rate variability, or if you prefer reading, you can find a blog post on our website. We know this works because numerous research studies have looked at the relationship between heart rate variability and training response. For example, one study measured the difference in training response after 24 sessions of moderate intensity training for two groups, one of which had high heart rate variability throughout the period, and a second which had low heart rate variability throughout that period. And they found the high heart rate variability group got literally 20 times the benefit for a given training load, which is, a huge amount. There are plenty of other studies that go in that direction as well. So, it's worth investing the time every day to measure this. The key point there is if you're outside the normal range, train easy or not at all. Okay, so now then, if too much stress means you can't recover and adapt, what can you do to decrease your stress? So let's start with a list of things to avoid. Most of this is pretty obvious, but you need to actively work on avoiding this. So poor sleep, everybody knows that, but do what you can to get better sleep. Extended desk time, that means more than an hour and a half sitting at your desk working on your computer without any movement. So make sure you take micro breaks. Conflict, obviously avoid that to the extent you can. High noise levels. If you're in an area with high noise, then wear ear defenders. Find a way to get away from it. Eating too much bad, between inverted commas, heavily industrialized, or eating too much food, are going to add to your stress. Too much social media, particularly in the evening, is going to add to your stress. Too much television, the same. And of course, intense training. Also, if you do too much of it, it's too much stress, and you need to back off. Now, a list of things to do more of. So, begin a habit of doing a few minutes of yoga every evening, or a few minutes of meditation. These are moments which really calm you down. Use a deliberate, slow, deep breathing as a way to calm yourself down and de-stress. Try to find some quiet time in nature. If you're lucky enough if you're in the middle of a big city, it may be difficult, unless there's a decent square nearby with some trees. But you try to get out sometime during the day and get yourself near some greenery, something natural. Eat good, nourishing food, listen to relaxing music, and as much easy movement as you can throughout the day. So the more you avoid the stuff on the left and the more you do the stuff on the right, the better numbers you'll see on your heart rate variability and the more effective your training is going to be. So this is really worth thinking about. Okay, we're almost finished. But before we do, we still have to mention, it's often an unpopular subject, but if you want to ride fast and hard, you're going to have to push harder on the pedals, which means stronger muscles. Sadly, for a cyclist, the best way to strengthen your muscles is off the bike. Even low cadence, high torque intervals won't help much, unfortunately. So to strengthen your legs and core, you should do 1 or 2 sessions per week, ideally guided by a strength and conditioning coach with experience in cycling. And the goal at this time of year is to increase the strength of your leg and core muscles. If you're new to this, please err on the side of caution to limit the risk of injury. And again, get someone to help you to make sure your technique is good. The most basic exercises are squats, lunges, planks, bridges, bicycle kicks, roll downs, all of that good stuff. But there are many more which are beneficial. Again, the key is to learn proper technique. Next, and equally important, is mobility and flexibility. Here you should be doing 2 to 3, 10, 15, or ideally 20-minute sessions per week. Pilates or yoga can be extremely beneficial, one or the other. They're different techniques with the same end result. Again, learning correct technique is vital. So choose a practitioner who knows cycling and only takes small groups, or better still, can work with you as an individual. And then finally, you should complement occasionally with other sports such as walking, running, or swimming, because if cycling is your only sport, you're going to build up imbalances and you will create soft tissue problems over time. All right, that's it. So I've given you the guidelines that should allow you to prepare yourself well between now and the end of March. Rendezvous on March the 27th to see how things have gone and to talk about part 2, the pre-competition period, the 3 months between April and the end of June. In the meantime, it's up to you to create your own custom training plan and then to follow it. If you'd like professional help to be at your absolute best for the Tour du Mont Blanc, we can help in 2 different ways. Of course, the first is to join one of our coaching camps, which will give you a big block of training as well as one-on-one coaching on your technical skills. And then if you don't have time to customize your own training plan, we can do it for you. Sign up for a 6-month coaching agreement and you'll get a custom plan updated as often as necessary and plenty of one-on-one advice. Do send us any questions. Thank you very much for listening and good luck.